Story 1. The Whistling Man of Pine Hollow. People who grow up in the Appalachian Mountains learn certain rules early in life. Don't follow voices you can't see. Don't wander off marked trails. And most importantly, never whistle in the woods after dark. Pine Hollow, Kentucky is the kind of place most Americans will never hear about. It doesn't show up on tourist maps, and even GPS systems struggle to place it correctly. It sits low between steep ridges, surrounded by dense forest that seems to swallow sound and light alike. Once a coal town, Pine Hollow lost its purpose decades ago. The mines closed, families left, nature reclaimed everything else. By 2008, fewer than 30 people still lived there. This is what happened to one of them. My Uncle Mark was a state-employed forest surveyor. He spent over 20 years mapping protected land throughout Appalachia. He was practical, skeptical, and deeply dismissive of anything supernatural. Ghost stories, mountain folklore, cryptids, he considered them distractions for people who didn't understand the woods. That changed during a 3-day survey assignment near Pine Hollow. Mark arrived in early October when the leaves were turning and the air carried that cold, metallic smell unique to Appalachian fall. His task was simple: document tree growth and erosion patterns along an abandoned logging trail about 2 miles outside town. He set up camp near dusk on the first day. No cell signal, no radio, just a tent, a fire, and miles of forest in every direction. The first night passed quietly. Too quietly. By the second evening, Mark noticed something odd. The forest didn't sound right. There were no crickets, no owls. Even the wind seemed hesitant, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. At around 7:40 p.m., just as the sun slipped behind the ridge, Mark heard it. A whistle. It was soft, off-key, slow. At first, he assumed it was another hiker, maybe someone else camping nearby. But the sound didn't behave the way a human whistle should. It drifted, not left or right, around him. Mark stood and scanned the tree line. "Hello?" he called out. The whistle stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt heavy, almost physical. His ears rang as if he'd been plunged underwater. Then he smelled something strange: wet leaves, old soil, and underneath it all, a sweet, rotting scent that made his stomach turn. Mark went to bed uneasy, but told himself it was nerves. At 2:13 a.m., the whistling returned. This time it was closer, so close that it sounded like it was just beyond the edge of the firelight. The tune hadn't changed, but the pauses between notes had. They felt intentional, calculated, like whatever was making the sound was waiting for an answer. Mark stayed completely still. He didn't respond. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. The whistle circled the camp once, twice, then faded into the trees. At dawn, Mark convinced himself it had been an animal, some bird he didn't recognize. Appalachia was full of strange wildlife, after all. That explanation fell apart less than an hour later. While walking the logging trail, Mark found footprints pressed deep into the mud. Bare footprints. They were massive, longer than his size 12 boots, and unnaturally narrow. The toes were stretched, splayed too far apart, and the heel impressions sank far deeper than should have been possible. The tracks formed a perfect ring around his campsite. Someone or something had walked around him all night. That evening, Mark considered leaving early, but deadlines and pride won out. He decided to stay one more night. As sunset approached, fog rolled in from the valley below. Appalachian fog doesn't behave like normal fog. It doesn't drift lazily. It surges upward, thick and fast, swallowing everything in minutes. By the time Mark finished lighting his fire, visibility had dropped to less than 10 feet. The whistling began almost immediately. This time, it was unmistakably human. A man's whistle, clear, controlled, confident. Mark grabbed his flashlight and swept the beam across the trees. The light caught on something pale, standing just beyond the fog line. At first, he thought it was a tree trunk. Then it tilted its head. The face was wrong, too long, too thin. Its mouth stretched into a grin that showed far too many teeth. The skin looked tight, like it barely fit the skull beneath it. The body emerged slowly from the fog. It was tall, unnaturally tall, its legs bent backward at the knees, joints popping softly as it shifted its weight. Its arms hung too low, fingers nearly brushing the ground, and it was still whistling. Mark couldn't move. The thing stopped at the edge of the firelight and cocked its head as if studying him. Then it took one step forward. Mark ran. He crashed through brush and branches, abandoning his gear, his food, everything. The whistling followed him, never growing louder or quieter, always just behind him. He tripped near an old mine shaft and hit the ground hard, knocking the breath from his lungs. The whistling stopped. Footsteps approached. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Crunch, pause, crunch. Mark squeezed his eyes shut. Then a second whistle echoed through the fog. Different tone, different direction. The footsteps halted. Something moved violently through the trees, followed by the sound Mark later described as wet, tearing fabric. Then silence. Mark didn't wait. He crawled, then ran until he reached the road at dawn. When he told the locals what he'd seen, no one laughed. An old woman at the diner crossed herself and whispered, "You heard him whistle first, didn't you?" She told Mark about the whistling man. According to Pine Hollow legend, two ancient things roam those mountains. One hunts, the other keeps it in check. When one whistles, the other answers. If you only hear one, you don't survive. Mark never returned to Pine Hollow. He never whistles anymore. And sometimes, late at night, he hears two whistles outside his window, calling for something that got away. Story 2. Something followed us out of Black Briar Creek. If you ask locals in southern West Virginia about Black Briar Creek, most of them will pretend they don't know what you're talking about. Not because it's a secret, but because acknowledging it feels dangerous, like saying a name out loud that shouldn't be spoken. Black Briar Creek sits deep in the Appalachian backcountry, far from maintained roads and cell service. It doesn't appear on most recreational maps, and the trail leading to it has been slowly reclaimed by the forest. Hunters know it, old-timers know it, and every single one of them will tell you the same thing. Don't camp near the water. Don't stay past sunset. And whatever you hear, don't answer it. We learned that too late. This happened in July of 2014. My name is Josh Miller, and I was 24 at the time. I'm writing this now because pretending it didn't happen hasn't worked, because one of us never came home, and because whatever lives near Black Briar Creek didn't stay there. There were 5 of us, me, my younger brother Evan, our friends Kyle and Brandon, and Kyle's girlfriend Megan. We planned a weekend camping and fishing trip. Nothing extreme, nothing reckless, just 2 nights in the woods, a cooler full of beer, and a break from work. We asked for directions at a small gas station outside a dying coal town.
The clerk, an older man with sunken eyes, gave us a long look when we mentioned Black Briar Creek. "You camping?" he asked. "Yeah," Kyle said, "just for the weekend." The man hesitated. Then he said quietly, "Don't stay by the water after dark." That was it. No explanation. We laughed about it on the drive in. The trail was barely recognizable, more a suggestion than a path. Trees pressed in tight, their branches knitting together overhead. The air felt thick, damp, and strangely still. Even before we reached the creek, I noticed something off. The woods were quiet. No birds, no insects, just the sound of our boots and our breathing. By mid-afternoon, we reached the water. Black Briar Creek was narrow but deep, its surface dark and reflective, like black glass. The surrounding trees leaned inward, their roots twisted and exposed along the banks. Evan was the first to notice something in the mud. A shirt. It was half buried near the water's edge, old, torn, and soaked through. Megan pulled it free with a stick. Faded letters across the front read Summer Camp 1997. It didn't look like it had been there long. "Probably washed down from somewhere," Brandon said. But Megan shook her head. "It smells fresh, not old, not moldy." That should have been our cue to leave. We set up camp anyway. As evening settled in, the forest changed. The already limited sounds faded completely. The air felt heavier, pressing down on us. When the sun dipped behind the trees, darkness came fast, unnaturally fast. Around 10:30 p.m., Megan sat up suddenly. "Did you hear that?" she asked. We all froze. Footsteps, slow, uneven, moving through the brush on the far side of the creek. Kyle stood and called out, "Hey, anyone there?" The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then we heard water moving. Not splashing, not flowing. Something was wading. I shined my flashlight toward the creek. The beam cut across the water and landed on a shape standing at the edge. It was tall, but hunched. Its neck seemed non-existent, its head resting directly on its shoulders. Its skin was pale and slick, like it had been soaking for hours. Its eyes didn't reflect the light. They looked hollow, empty. It wasn't drinking. It was leaning down, inhaling deeply through its mouth, smelling the water. None of us spoke. The thing's head twitched sharply toward us. Its joints made a dry, cracking sound, like old wood bending. Then it stepped backward into the creek. The water didn't ripple. It just accepted it. That's when we decided to leave. We started packing in a panic, stuffing gear wherever it fit. Then the footsteps returned. Not one set, several. Moving through the trees, surrounding us. Megan started crying. "They're all around us," she whispered. Then we heard it. A voice, low, wet, struggling to form words. "Josh." My blood ran cold. I had never said my name out loud. "That's not funny," Evan said, his voice shaking. "Josh," the voice repeated, closer this time. Then another voice joined it. Megan's voice, crying. But Megan was standing right next to me. Kyle shouted, "Run!" We bolted into the trees, headlamps bouncing wildly as branches tore at our clothes. Behind us, we heard splashing, snapping wood, and voices, our voices, calling out in panic, in pain, in terror. Always a second too late, always slightly wrong. Brandon tripped. He screamed. I turned in time to see something pale grab his ankle from the darkness. Then another shape surfaced beside it, and another. We dragged him free, but something came with us. When we reached the car, we slammed the doors shut. Something hit the trunk once, hard. Then silence. We drove without speaking. The next morning, we stopped for gas. When we came back to the car, Brandon was gone. No doors open, no signs of a struggle, just muddy footprints leading away from the parking lot and water pooling on the back seat. Police never found him. A local officer pulled me aside and said quietly, "Black Briar Creek doesn't give back what it takes." Sometimes, late at night, I hear someone outside my house. They sound like my brother. They sound like Brandon, and they want me to come closer to the water.
Story 3. The Last Recording from Red Ash Cabin. Red Ash Cabin was never meant to be lived in. It sits high in the Appalachian Mountains of southwestern Virginia, miles from the nearest paved road. The structure was originally built in the 1940s as a fire watch outpost, then later repurposed as a temporary research shelter for forestry workers. By the early 2000s, it was officially decommissioned. Locals still know where it is, they just don't go there. In November of 2019, a wildlife acoustics researcher named Daniel Harper requested permission to spend 2 weeks alone in Red Ash Cabin. His goal was to collect long-term audio recordings of nocturnal forest sounds, specifically infrasound and anomalous noise patterns reported in deep Appalachian regions. Daniel was experienced. He'd done solo fieldwork before. He brought backup batteries, food, firearms, and an array of recording equipment. What he didn't bring was a satellite phone. This is important later. Daniel arrived on November 3rd. He checked in via email that night, saying the cabin was intact and the equipment was running. That was the last normal communication anyone received from him. 5 days later, his supervisor noticed something strange. The audio files Daniel had set to upload automatically were still coming in, but Daniel wasn't responding. Search and rescue teams were dispatched on November 11th. When they reached Red Ash Cabin, Daniel Harper was gone. No body was ever found, but his final audio recording was. Transcript from Recorder 3B, recovered file. Timestamp, November 7th, 1:42 a.m. Static. Wind. I don't know why the forest keeps going quiet. It's not gradual. It's like something flips a switch. Pause. There were owls earlier, at least 2. They stopped at exactly 1:17, same time as last night. Faint tapping sound. That's coming from outside. Pause. Probably a branch. Daniel's personal journal was found inside the cabin. The entries grew increasingly erratic. Day 3. Hearing movement around the cabin at night. Heavy steps. Could be elk, but cadence feels wrong. Day 4. Recorded a low-frequency sound at 22 hertz. Too consistent, almost rhythmic. Day 5. Something touched the cabin last night. Transcript, Recorder 1A. Timestamp, November 3rd, 3:09 a.m. A dull scraping noise, slow, repetitive. Okay, that's not an animal. Scraping stops. I can hear breathing. It's above me, on the roof. Long silence. It's dragging something. Investigators later noted deep gouge marks on the cabin's metal roof. Whatever caused them was heavy enough to dent reinforced panels. Daniel's final journal entry was written in shaking handwriting. Day 6. Hearing movement around the cabin at night. Heavy steps. Could be elk, but cadence feels wrong. Day 5. Something touched the cabin last night. Transcript, Recorder 2C.
Wind howls, then stops abruptly. Why did it knock like that? 3 slow knocks echo, wood on wood. That was deliberate. Pause. It's doing it again. Knocking repeats, closer. No animal knocks. Daniel attempted to leave the cabin that night. Mud and snow outside showed clear boot prints leading away from the door, then stopping abruptly, as if he froze in place. No return tracks. Final audio file. Timestamp, November 8th, 1:26 a.m. Heavy breathing, shaking microphone. It learned my voice. Pause. I heard myself call my name from the trees. Something moves outside, slow, heavy steps. It's standing where the tree line ends. It's tall, too tall. Low, wet sound, almost like breathing through water. The forest stopped again. Everything stops when it moves. Soft tapping at the door. It's tapping with one finger. Tap, tap, tap. It's waiting for me to answer. Voice outside, distorted, wrong. Daniel? Come outside. Daniel sobs. I'm not opening the door. The voice repeats, closer, clearer. Daniel, you left the light on. Something presses against the door. Wood creaks. It's smiling. I can hear it smiling. Sudden loud impact. Microphone clatters. If someone finds this, another voice joins the first. Same words, same tone. There's more than one. Recording cuts to static. When search teams arrived, the cabin door was still locked from the inside. The interior lights were on. Daniel's equipment was intact, but the roof hatch, normally bolted shut, was open. Inside the cabin, investigators found long scratches along the ceiling, not claw marks, finger marks. Too long, too evenly spaced. Locals later told authorities about an old belief tied to Red Ash Ridge. They say something lives high in the mountains that doesn't hunt like an animal. It listens, it practices, it learns how to sound human, and when it gets good enough, it knocks. Why this matters? Daniel Harper was never found, but hikers in that region still report hearing a man calling for help, always just beyond the tree line. And if you listen closely to the official recording, beneath Daniel's voice, near the end, you can hear something else breathing.